right, so we're going to jump into philosophy. Yesterday, we kind of talked about the Peloponnesian War being a reflection of how Athens and Sparta, kind of their alliances not getting along, and ultimately that causing problems. But this is the golden age of Greece. We see that during that time of the Delian League, we see that that Athens had been rebuilding their whole city. But we also see another thing happening during that time, a thing called philosophy. Okay, so philosophy is a Greek word. Okay, it means it's actually mean, or the word is actually philosophia, which means the love of wisdom. So we're going to talk about that. So some early background about the philosophy is that some of the earliest philosophy can be traced all the way back to 500, reached its height in Athens during the 400s and 300 BC. Some of your earlier philosophers that helped inspire some of the less well-known philosophies are Socrates, or his real name is actually pronounced Socrates. But if you guys ever watch Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, okay, Socrates. That's because they don't know how to pronounce his name. But anyway, it's but his student Plato, and then his student Aristotle. So we're going to talk about all three guys. So Socrates, what about Socrates? What makes him so great? What's so awesome about him? Well, he's one of the first great Athenian philosophers. There's little known about his personal life. There's not too many writings about him. He doesn't write down a lot of his philosophy. All of his writings are actually written down by his student, Plato. Plato's the one who actually writes down a lot of his ideas because that's where he gets his inspiration. So as far as what we know about Socrates, it's from Plato. Plato is the one who does that. As far as broad concepts, there are writings that give clear picture of Socrates' thoughts. He had a lot of big concept on the idea of human life. He was focused on things like truth, justice, virtue, what those looked like. What we're going to learn about Socrates is he was one that loved to ask questions. He loved to ask questions. And number 15 is your answer. Is Socrates. He believed philosophers can learn a lot just by asking simple questions. Okay, just going, why is the sky blue? Why do people eat McDonald's? Why do kids continue to wear hats? I don't know. I mean, I'm kidding right now. But anyway, but that's how he got to understanding the reasoning to why things happened. So it's understanding truth. His whole idea of understanding truth and what is truth. Okay. So, but he was always asking questions in society, learning about people, wanting to know about people. The thing about, though, the Socrates method is that a lot of it was just questions, because then once you give him an answer, he would ask another question until he pretty much got his idea of the truth. I mean, in some ways, you can kind of say that the media is kind of like that. That's what we do. We continue to ask questions. Because we're trying to figure out the information. We're trying to figure out something. And so sometimes when you ask a question, it's like, so why did you do this? And then someone, says, well, I did it because I was concerned about such and such. And then you follow up with another question of like, well, but why that such and such? What was so key about that such and such? And then, well, here's the thing about that, blah, 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 blah. And then you get more information. So that's kind of how a journalist does. They kind of use the Socratic method in some ways, trying to figure out truth, trying to figure out why people tick or why people make the decisions that they do. And that's what we see here, is that the Socratic method is known for just the series of questions, going through those series of questions, understanding basic things of life, and understanding, how we learn. And so that's how he learned, is through questions. Plato. Answer number 13 is right there on the bottom right there, guys. So Plato, one of Socrates' students, became great philosopher in his own right. Left behind a great number of writings that record the ideas of a wide variety of topics, from nature of truth to the ideal of form of government. Plato had kind of created what is called the Republic, which was kind of his forms of writing. And basically, the Republic was basically his argument about what government should look like. And he felt like the government should be led by philosophers. Okay. Pretty elitist. His idea of government was more, hey, I think the best and most qualified people should be the ones to run the government. And in some aspects, I agree with that. I do think qualifications matter. But to be led by philosophers, maybe not the best decision. So, but again, it's all about how you interpret that, how you see that. So, but Plato definitely felt like government could be better. So, so theory of government philosophers, he felt like were the most qualified to make the good decisions. Did not support Athenian democracy and how it was put together, how men could take part in it. Basically, so what Plato does is he wants to make sure he gets as many philosophers as he can in society. So he wanted to make philosophers' education more formal. And so he founded what is called the Academy, which is where Plato's lifetime became the most important site for Greek philosophers to do their work. The idea of the Academy was to create something that people could learn, or he can raise new philosophers where they can learn about the truth, learn about society, learn about what is best for them. Okay, definition for Aristotle's here on the slide. You see anything in the yellow right there. So Aristotle was one of those students who studied at the Academy, more concerned with nature of the world that surrounded him. He tried to apply philosophical principles to every kind of knowledge. That's kind of where Aristotle was. Aristotle was pretty. Gosh, what am I trying to say? Pretty different. I don't know. I guess, yeah, different. He was just different in how he went about things. It's not that he didn't take Plato or Socrates' position on the world, but he's going to kind of take a different approach to things and understanding knowledge. But definitely knowledge is a key to his ideals. So Aristotle's emphasis was more on reason and logic. We see that reason was clear, ordered thinking, use reason to learn about the world. Okay, so what he did is that he would observe carefully, he would observe the world carefully, looking for what he was seeing. Based on his observations, he can then kind of make certain conclusions about the world, and that gave him a better understanding of why people were doing some of the things they were doing. It's, and honestly, it's like, for example, your coach is trying to prepare for the next game. Okay, how are they going to learn about their opponent? Film, yes. And you got to observe that film. You got to study that film. Studying is how you learn. Okay? So that's what Aristotle's saying here. Is like, look, you got to study. You got to study people. You got to see how they act, why they're doing it. I mean, because if I just, if Jolly, just some sort of, unordinary type of behavior, on the surface, I'm going, man, like there's something wrong with that girl. Like, there's something wrong. But then if I start to observe what's going on and really pay attention, I might be able to key like, why is she acting the way she is? Oh, okay, there's something, you know, I could see that Younger is, you know, getting under her skin or something, you know, or doing something that shouldn't be doing. So you kind of learn more. Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, but no, that's what we're saying is that it's a situation where you have to learn, you have to observe, you have to get all the information, and once you gather all the information, you can make those conclusions, and that's what reasoning is about, and that's what Aristotle is saying, is that you can't do that without getting all the information. So that's where logic comes into place. So you're taking all those observations, all those interferences, and you're making that conclusion. So an example of this would be birds have feathers. So you observe that birds have feathers, okay? And they lay eggs. So owls have feathers and lay eggs. Therefore, they must be a bird. So it's taking that information, applying it to other ways or other methods, and that's where you come up with your logic. Okay, Greek literature. Now, Greek literature makes a bit of a standing in society. We see that what ends up happening during this time in Greek literature is that we are starting to see very popular poetry, epics, history occurring during this time. And it's really affecting culture. And philosophy plays a part in this, but most of this is coming from the people and the culture that they live. But there's a lot of great things that occur during this time. One of those things is Homer. We talked a little bit about Homer in section 1. Going to go a little bit further into Homer this time with his epics. Okay. Most famous works are some of the earliest epic poems of the greatest events and heroes, and that is the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're both based around the Trojan War. Okay. Now, the Iliad is actually the Trojan War. Talking about Helen of Troy, the Mycenaean Greeks, Achilles, all talking about that battle. The Trojan horse. You guys heard about the Trojan horse? So that is all the Iliad. The Odyssey is a little bit different. So all right, moving on to the next one. Sorry. Yep. Okay, so definition for Iliad's coming up. Here's your definition for Iliad. So Iliad tells the story of last year of Trojan War. It tells the two heroes of Achilles and Hector. Hector's the Prince of Troy, who's, I believe, if I remember, I think he's supposed to marry Helen of Troy. But and Achilles is the greatest of all warriors. Now, the Odyssey tells the story of heroes from the war. Odysseus. Basically, what ends up happening is Odysseus is a king who leads his men to the Trojan War. And on his way back home, he is wandering the sea. And he is basically, the gods are punishing him. And it's kind of like the story of Job a little bit, you know, really testing your will and whether or not your beliefs in some aspects. But the gods are punishing him, and he's having to like really battle through these challenges because he wants to get home to his wife. And basically, he wanders the sea for so long, and then he finally gets back, and it's been for years. I can't remember. I think his wife has to marry the new king or whatever. But anyway, he comes back as an old man, and you know he hides his identity because he wants to test his wife's love. And eventually he's able to reveal himself to her, and she's like, "Oh, you're my husband." And he's able to eventually win the kingdom back. And it has a happy ending, but he definitely goes through a lot of these monsters like a cyclops and all these different types of mythical creatures and things like that. So, but these works are the basis of Greek education system. They're basically taught by all Greeks. Now, Homer never wrote these down. Okay, Homer was blind, so he taught them through speaking. That's why they're the poems. They're spoken, but eventually they were taught. They were spoke orally over time, and eventually somebody wrote them down. There are other forms of poetry. There are many different types. One of them, other besides epics, we said, Hesiod wrote descriptive poetry about works of gods, lives of peasants, and then there was, and by the way, Sappho is right down there. If it's really small, but so anyway, Greeks also created lyric poetry, named after the lyre, which is a musical instrument, and often played to accompany reading of poems. Lyric poems do not tell stories, but deal with emotions and desires. Sappho was one of the Greeks, one of the very few Greek women to gain fame as a writer. Dealt with marriage, love, relationships with her family and friends. And then Pindar in the late 500s, early 400s poems commemorated public events like the Olympic Games. So in addition to poetry, the ancient Greeks also wrote works of other fields. One of those would be history. So the reason why you have history class with me is because of the Greeks. And there's your answer number 11 right there. So among the fields for the Greeks best known is history. Greek authors wrote and analyzed their own past during this time. We see that first major historian, Herodotus, basically wrote about the Persian War. In his most famous work, The Histories, it's actually called The Histories, lived in Greece during the Persian War, and described the battles of the public debates in those histories. Some of the events he had witnessed himself, but some were reported to him by other people. Unfortunately, the problem with Herodotus is that we can't quite trust all of his work because some of the sources were unreliable and led to errors in his history. So some of his history is actually debunked by other historians from the Greek times because he did not use what is called primary sources. Okay? Sources that actually were there, that actually experienced it, that documented it. Okay? That's why your English teachers, what do they always tell you when you're trying to source something? Get a documented source. Okay, you haven't gotten there yet, freshman. So sorry. You're going to get there. Juniors, have you gotten there yet? Have you done the primary sources? You've done that since sixth grade? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Well, I don't know. I mean, sometimes they don't. I don't know. When you get up. Okay. In middle school. Well, you're going to relearn them, and definitely when you get to Miss Gleason's class. So having those primary sources, secondary sources, they're important. They're needed. Okay. Gotta document. All right. Then there was Thucydides. Basically, what about him? Well, he lived during the Peloponnesian War, and he wrote about it in detail. If you look at number 12, can somebody read number 12 for me? Okay. We'll find that one. So Thucydides lived during the Peloponnesian War, wrote about it in detail, included primary sources like speeches, and he actually heard delivered. He looked at sources critically, ignored unreliable, irrelevant sources. Describing famous men, another early historian was Xenophon. He fought in the Persian War in the 400 BC. He was both a soldier and philosopher. He concentrated less on sources, debates, and more on describing famous men, and had less critical style. He took work has helped us learn what his life was like in 300 BC. Okay, some other writings are, this is where we get a lot of our entertainment from, is drama. The art of playwriting. That's your definition right there. While the Greeks did write histories to preserve their past, they also wrote about it in an entertainment form. They wrote it, as we know, as drama, which is playwrights. Okay? Now, drama today is a little bit different from drama then. We'll get into that. So, some of your earliest dramas came from, and you were about to answer number 14. Everything in yellow. I mean, pretty much everything. There you go. So, some of your earliest dramas came from festivals. These festivals were to honor the gods, mostly Dionysus, god of wine and celebration. Most of these dramas consisted of groups of actors called the chorus, and they would recite stories to the audience. So this is where you start to see that they would take some of those great stories of that of Homer and others, and then they would recite them and create these stage-like performances where they would kind of tell a story about something, a certain aspect of their culture. Sometimes it would have to deal with gods and, monsters, depending on, the situation. But a lot of it was there to honor the gods, but, to have some fun too. Correction on number 11. You should write actually Thucydides, not Herodotus. Sorry, that's my bad. So write this guy down. He is number 11. I made a mistake. I accidentally put the wrong number on the wrong dude. Yes, Thucydides is the one who was more reliable. Okay, he trusted more reliable sources. He actually did the homework. So there you go. That's my bad. My bad. All right. Let's get caught back up again. Okay. Dramas are very complex. Okay. Dramas really told a lot about the individual. Okay. And their specific stories. There are two distinct forms. There was tragedy and comedy. Okay. And so basically, instead of today we have comedies and we have dramas. Okay. So what they did with the drama is they combined the two. They had the tragedy and the comedy, but then they'd split, one's a tragedy, one's a comedy. Because here's the thing have you guys ever watched a really good comedy? Sometimes it gets a little deep. It's not trying to be goofy joke here, goofy joke there all the time. It brings a little substance, a little bit of some heart, a little bit of some realism to the story. Have you guys ever watched something like that? Like a good comedy like that? because that's really what comedy is. I mean, comedy is a form of drama too. Yes, it's there to make you laugh. Yes, it's there to entertain you and make you feel enjoyable. But it also, if you really want people to enjoy those characters, you have to bring some realism to the characters. So one of the reasons why I love Scrubs. Everybody watched Scrubs before? Good show, good show. Because even though, yes, JD is goofy in that show, Zach Braff, who plays JD, and their other characters are goofy, there's some real heart to it because they're dealing with real life problems like people getting sick and people dying. And so that you can't ignore death. Like, I mean, you can't make death super funny. I mean, it's hard. Those emotions are real. And so they kind of tried to their best to at least portray those emotions. Whereas tragedy is kind of like what your drama is today. Okay. Have you ever like watched a movie? Sometimes you walk out and you go, man, that was like really depressing. Like, has that ever happened? Like, you even try to watch like a romantic movie that's like, like, I love you, Bill. I love you, Sally. Oh, you're my best. And then something like tragic happens, like, like The Notebook, those types of movies. What is it? I forget the guy who writes those novels, but anyway, like there's always something bad that happens at the end. Well, that's kind of what drama is today. Drama is tragedy. That's what today's dramas are. They're tragedy. So we have the Greeks to thank for our own entertainment on television. So a lot of the tragedies focused on the hardships that Greek heroes faced. Some of these stories were written by certain writers. One of them was named Aeschylus. Aeschylus wrote Greek myths on events from Athenian history. His most famous series, Plays on Hysteria, tells the tragedies that faced the leader of the Greek army when he returned to the aftermath of the Trojan War, so kind of close to the Odyssey. Then there's Sophocles. Sophocles was suffering people brought on themselves. So basically, like, Sophocles punished his characters. So pay attention to this. This is interesting. One main character, listen to this. One main character unknowingly killed his father and married his own mother. That's what he wrote about. So kind of like, Hamlet type situation. So that's what he created, those types of tragedies. And then Euripides. He also wrote about characters of tragedy that brought about by their flaws, irrational behavior. For example, Medea tells of a woman who swears revenge on her unfaithful husband, killing his wife and family. So, ooh. And then there was comedies. Many comedies were satires, plays written to expose flaws in society, make fun of society. Eurysthenes, Greek comedy writer, plays poked fun of aspects of Athenian society, their government, their treatment of women. It also kind of mocks the gods a little bit. They would have the clouds as part of the representing the sky. So that was what comedies were about. They basically made fun a lot about their Greek society. Okay, as far as art went, Athenians enjoyed beauty, both written and visual. They were all about perfection. They expressed love with written beauty through literature, visual beauty through architecture and art. So they loved art. They loved to show off what the best of art, even though realism wasn't quite always their main thing. Athenians wanted their city to be the most beautiful city, so they would build a lot of these beautiful temples during their time. And they would build these theaters as well, public buildings, and they would show off some great art as well. To enhance the appearance of buildings, they added fine works of art, painted and sculpted grandest buildings built on the Acropolis at the city's center. There was the Parthenon. We talked a little about this yesterday. I'm going to show a video in class. most magnificent magnificent on the Acropolis. Was a massive temple to Athena to honor her, the goddess of wisdom. Began by Pericles in 447 BC, and it took 14 years to build. So we see the Parthenon is probably one of the most impressive buildings by size and its proportion. The Parthenon, more than 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, had doors, no windows, surrounded by tall, graceful columns. Above columns, slabs of marble carved with scenes from the myths. Ruins appear white today, but at the time, they were actually painted a vivid hue, and it had a lot of huge gold ivory statue of Athena inside the Parthenon. Also, Greek sculptures among some of the finest work of arts, particularly adapted at sculpting human form, studied people at rest and moving, tried to recreate what they saw, paid particular attention to the muscles. They're all about muscles. So Greeks wanted their statues to look lifelike and active. There's some realism to it, but as far as realistic, like what they would do sometimes is, like, for example, if they wanted to, do a like a statue of a man, maybe he didn't quite have a six pack, maybe they were like, okay, get in kind of a cool position, and he was like this, maybe like doing a pose, strike a pose, and then they would probably add like some cool pecs and some abs, and try to really show off, like, hey, this guy's fit, even though technically he really wasn't. So that's kind of what they did, is they would try to bring out perfection. So they would like, what is it? Photoshop, like, how sometimes like they take pictures of actors and actresses and they kind of Photoshop, like their complexion a little bit. It's kind of like what they did back then with their art. They took out the blemishes, the imperfections, like, yeah, we're going to give you a little bit of a six pack, and then we're just going to take that mole off. We're not going to, sculpt that mole. So anyway, they would just try to make the most beautiful, graceful person in the world, even though it's not accurate. So, problem with the Greeks, though, is some of their greatest work, their originals, don't last because, unfortunately, the material that they used broke down over time. So, but the good news is some of their best work got copied. The Romans come in, they're like, hey, we like that work of art. Let's make a copy of it. And so some of the greatest art of the Greeks are copies from the Romans. So some of the originals have been destroyed. So, and if you look at it, some of the marble that they use and the type of material that they use, you can see why. Because, like, when I show you a picture of the Parthenon, you're going to go, oh man, that thing didn't hold up. You look at a Roman building, those hold up. And I'll tell you, one key invention: concrete. That is what's going to make things better. Painting was also a big part of Greek society. A lot of paintings survive. We do see a lot of vases, plates. Formally, it's a vase. Informal, it's a vase. There you go. Anyway, so scenes from everyday life, from myths, legends, and they use a lot of red, black, and they would convey movement. Okay, your number 12 is right here on this slide right there. Little evidence of larger works. Written sources say Greeks created murals in public buildings, often included scenes from the Iliad, Odyssey, showed off aftermath of battles rather than the battle itself. Themes similar to tragic drama, popular to Athens. So the Greeks were very creative, very smart individuals. However, despite all their great achievements, they would not last as the Athenians or the Spartans anymore. As we're going to learn on Monday, a man named Alexander the Great is going to come down from Macedonia and basically conquer all of Greece and unite them as one and get rid of all the city-state stuff and go, hey, you're a Greek now. You're no longer an Athenian or a Spartan. You're a Greek. And it's going to change the game. And so, and still, look, he'll still keep some of this cool culture stuff, but it's going to look different. And we're going to talk about that on Monday. Woo! We are done.